Okay, thanks very much for everyone who's joined. Let's just bring my slides up. So I hope you've been enjoying the conference today so far. Always grateful to be given the opportunity to talk, and would definitely like to thank the European Teams user group team for the effort they put into this event. I was actually heading away from the main stage at Latitude Festival in the UK when I could feel phone alerts going mad. Once I got the kids somewhere safe, well, I could keep an eye on them. I managed to see what it was, and it was Twitter kicking off with the announcement that this session was going ahead. So it's a great way to find out. Let's kick off and get started. This session will be about driving adoption of Microsoft Teams by using a bot, and specifically a game or challenge style bot. I'll cover a little bit about ways of approaching adoption, the ways I recommend, and then delve into the bot I've created to support this. I will pause at a few points for questions. I don't have the chat window up alongside this all the time, so if there is a burning question, please unmute and just give me a shout. Teams has been a really popular tool. You can see the chart showing there, showing the interest over time from Google searches. So you can see that it's starting to really get to a peak around July, August this year, and growing and growing. If we look that it's now used, this was 6 months ago roughly now, by about 500,000 organizations from the launch in March 2017, and more recently there's about 13 million users, and it's overtaken Slack, so still seeing a lot of growth. It's being used by Cricket Australia, which may explain why they were so lucky in the Ashes this year, and it can also support 8 Indian languages, so it's starting to spread out not just the English language but to many others as well, and many other alphabets including there. And it even has a Linux client being developed for it, which shows it's a whole new Microsoft. Just going to take a pause and talk a little bit about me. My name's Kevin McDonnell. I'm a solution architect working for CPS. I blog a little on digital workplace topics at mcd79.com, so do take a look. Have to admit it's dropped back a little bit recently. I would like to pick that up again, and certainly will be publishing more details on this Daily Bing Challenge bot on there. I'm on Twitter at Kev McDonk. As I mentioned, I work for CPS, primarily doing Office 365 and looking at bot solutions. Please do feel free to follow me on LinkedIn and GitHub as well. Been working in SharePoint since about 2004, and it was actually with CPS that I first got introduced to SharePoint, but back then was working for a financial services organization. So I was on the other side of the fence, kicking off a project server implementation, and I started to see the power of SharePoint, and then got into the other Office 365 suites and Teams, and saw the ability for people to get things done themselves. So really being a keen enthusiast of these over the years. Let's get back now into Teams itself. Organizations are loving the ability to create hubs of collaboration with chat, voice, and content all in one place for a common purpose. So does that mean you can just turn it on, sit back and watch the magic? Unfortunately, as I'm sure many of you know, it doesn't work as easily as that. You can have great technology that will support digital transformation, but if no one uses it, you just have an expensive mistake. Microsoft had a great product with Windows Phone. Many of the people who used it loved it as a use on there. But then a few years later, having bought Nokia, having bought the hardware unit, they had one of the biggest ever net losses and a huge write-down, $7.5 billion write-down from Nokia. So even though they had what many people considered a great platform, which many people who used loved, it just didn't take off. If we look outside of that, Sega had a lovely product with the Dreamcast. It was their follow-up to the Sega Master System and Mega Drive, or Genesis to anyone listening from the US, and they brought in the Dreamcast. But they didn't build on that marketing hype. They didn't get the adoption. They didn't get the usage that they wanted. And despite, again, people loving it as a platform, it just couldn't keep the dominance of Xbox and PlayStation taking over. If we look closer to the digital workplace space, you've got items like Yammer, you've got Salesforce Chatter, Jive, Workplace, and even the SharePoint feed itself. Many of you have been involved in projects with very large budgets trying to roll out these enterprise social projects over the last decades or so. Huge investments that soon languished in folklores. People just got stuck with using email, with using what they were used to, and not adopting these tools, not looking at the benefits that they can bring, because they just didn't see the point. So why do you think many of these projects fail? Why, when millions of pounds in some cases can be put into these for large organizations, do they still not stick? Do they still end up languishing and unused while people stick with Outlook? Some of the reasons, I think, is lack of adoption planning. Often when it's an IT-driven project, the focus can be on the technology, the focus can be on getting that infrastructure in place without looking at who's going to adopt it, without looking at who can help drive the usage of it, without looking at who can push and why people would want to move over to it. Again, even if you do that planning, there can be resistance to change. There's people who love the propeller plane and don't see the point of moving jets. They want to resist and look to keeping with what they know and being familiar with that. There's a lot of staff who sat in their comfort zone, who are kind of focused on what they do and not seeing the benefit of changing the way they work. And they're too busy as well. It's great to see so many people on this call who've managed to make some time, but in large organizations, there are a lot of busy people, and the thought of having to do another technology change that's just going to change the way they do the same thing really doesn't drive them to want to adopt it. So how would I recommend some techniques of actually pushing this out, of actually getting people to look at adoption? Now, I would say I'm not going to give you the answer. I'm going to give you a few answers and a few ideas that could help drive towards it. So think about talking about how to adopt. Think about engaging those stakeholders, the key people who are funding it, and making sure that they are pushing down from the top. If you're getting the funding from your senior management team, but they're not pushing down to their teams to do it, then it won't get the engagement. In so many cases, it's the senior people pushing and even adopting it themselves that will drive it out to others. I think it's also worth looking at a purpose to showcase. So whether that could be a particular project, putting it up on a specific project, using Teams, using the tabs to measure the project, connecting up with other items like Planner, getting all your documents in one place and getting people to use that as the hub, that when it then rolls out to other projects, people who've been involved in that one can start to recommend what works well and get that user adoption. Starting to get those key people involved, whether it be the key managerial stakeholders, whether it be people who really can help drive the adoption outside of IT and can start to spread the word, but get that real purpose. It could also be an ideation. You could start to use Teams to capture ideas from across the organization or from cross specific groups and discuss those ideas. But taking a purpose and using that as a reason to go through will give people a reason to go onto it. Also, if you start to have that idea, that initial purpose, you start to get those initial stakeholders, and actually the scope extends a bit, support that. Don't just keep always in the fixed, rigid view of this is the path we need to go along. If some of the teams are jumping ahead and really jumping on board, then embrace that, embrace those ones and spread that story. Take the great story on how they're using things and send it out to other people. Another way I've used in the past, not necessarily with Teams, I worked in a large financial organization that rolled out a chat platform, and it was getting a little bit of usage, but there were still huge areas we could see from the stats, huge numbers of people that just weren't using it, and those that were using it a little bit, but not engaged a lot. So one of the other ways is to start to look at ideas of having your sports teams having the chat, having food chats, talking about in different offices, what are the restaurants to go to nearby, what are the new openings that are worth going, especially countries like Singapore that are very driven by their love of food. Embrace that and get people talking. Photography clubs are another great example. People can then put up their photos, share those images, and that for a large organization can be cross-country, cross-cultural, bringing across those boundaries, sharing that passion for photography, and starting to adopt that chat way. And what then happens is the people that do that, for example, the organization I mentioned, the photography group, they still are in contact. Many of the people have left but have set up their own group. They've created that community, and they start to learn about how to build that community and apply that to more work related items. They start to look at pushing it out to others. They start to look at using it within their projects, use it within their hierarchical teams, use it within cross organizational projects, or just communities of interest, such as maybe they're using it for C# for talking about their dev chat. Maybe it's for a county council and they're talking about social care across many different departments, and it starts to become more work related. Now, it is always a hard message when you're looking to do this, especially the chat becomes less formal when you're looking at these social areas. But if you drive this out, if you engage with management to explain why you're doing this, to see the adoption and track that adoption as it flows further towards the more work-related items, you have an engaged staff and you have an engaged platform that is actually being used. Now, this idea of using the social channels, I think, works very nicely within Teams itself. And you can roll out, again, these social chat groups. But beyond chat, you've then got the file sharing. I mentioned the idea of the photography channel. So being able to share those photos in there, comment in line very easily, and also have that back history of those files that are available. You've got integrations. You can run your meetings within Teams as well, having everything in one place. But you also have the ability to create bots. And this is where I had a bit of an idea on how we could drive some adoption. Now, previous organisation I worked with, someone there, thank you, Mark Slavic, if you happen to be listening, asked if someone knew where the Bing background was. For those who've used Bing, if I'll just pop over to bring it up on screen now. If you go to bing.com, rather than having the white background that Google often has, they have a nice image. But if you look very quickly, it doesn't show where it was. And Mark, on someone else on the picture of that day, wondered where that image was. And they didn't know, so they took a guess, and then they hovered over and clicked on the blazing blueberries. And for example, in this case, found out it was the Acadia National Park in Maine, USA. And this gradually became into a bit of a challenge. It started off with people chatting between them and then went a little bit further. It became a daily email. So Mark would go and screenshot the Bing image, email it around to a group, and everyone would reply, say what they thought was closest. And then either when everyone had already replied, or once it got to the end of the day, just going to hide those news stories because even I'm getting distracted by those. Once it got to the end of the day, they'd work out who was closest, and there would be a congratulatory email that went round to everyone. Now, as people came on board, joined the team, we got more and more people on board doing this, and it became quite a big task. And of course, the odd argument about whether people managed to work out whether one place was closer than the other. And it got me thinking that actually a bot would be a very good way of doing this. Now, I'd explored the bot framework, and I decided to look at how that could be used. So let's go back to the slides, and we're going to go into a demo of the bot itself. So here you can see this is our live Teams channel. So you will see some messages pop up potentially. I will try and keep them to one side. And this is the bot. And in fact, today's challenge is already in there. So what happens, I've got an automated trigger that comes through. And at 8:45 every morning, it says, it's time for the daily Bing challenge. And it will go to Bing and will pull the image from there and say, do you want to use that? Now, when I talk about the Bing image, there's actually, I think it's 7 or 8 different ones for different countries. So this is the background for Australia. In many cases, it's actually the same image. So I've just had the ability to swap through and try the different images. And in fact, actually Neil jumped ahead of me there and picked that one. If I go back a few days, let's have a look. I think it was this one, that where you could pick the different ones. And also found that on some days, for example, when Wimbledon was on or other big events, actually all the images were same. And when it's Wimbledon and the picture is of a tennis court with grass, it's pretty obvious where it was. So we also introduced the ability to either switch to Bing or switch to Google. So Google will pick a point anywhere in the world. It'll do a random pick for a GPS location, have a look within I think it was a 50-kilometer radius, look for any images that are in there and bring back that image. And I think it picks from about 5, it will randomly pick one of those. And this is a random image there. And then you can choose another one. If you think, oh, that's too obvious or didn't like it, then you can swap to a different one. Or as you can see here, I've swapped over to Bing and it's picked the image there. Once whoever it is, and this is available to anyone who's a member of that team, can pick this. So we've had a very open logic to this, that anyone who's there, rather than be reliant on 1 or 2 people who may or may not be in the office or may be too busy, it's really up to anyone who gets there first. Once you click on choose image, it will say, yep, that's all good. Reply to the Bing bot, get your guess in. Results will come in either when everyone in the team has added a guess or at 4 o'clock. So we've given a deadline to it to make sure we go through, and then it will kick off. As you can see, you just reply at BingBot and put the place name in there. You can either put a very distinct one. You can see there I made sure I got the right country within it, and that will fire off to the Bing API, bring back the location based on that text as a GPS coordinate and log that. And it just lets me know that I've logged that. In this case, the exact thing I've searched for, it's picked it up on there. There's other ones, for example, David here on Monday, search for Buxton, and it's just reassured that it says Buxton, Derbyshire, United Kingdom. We have seen some instances where I think Leicester was one of them, and it actually came up with Leicester in the US rather than Leicester in the UK. So that's why I'm sometimes a little bit pernickety when I'm feeling confident I know the right place. And the nice thing about this is you can either go for Loire Valley, or I could have just said France. You can be more specific with the towns. You can even, if I have a look at, I think it was Neil's one from yesterday. Let's see, where's it gone? We had a bit of an interesting one that he decided to put bird in there. So I was intrigued to see up, and it actually picked up Bird Island. So we have had some of my more comedy-related colleagues try and break this with various silly things, and it does pick it up. It does seem to work on there. So once it pulls through, you can see every time someone enters, it tracks out of how many users out of the number in the channel actually come through. We get a reminder that comes through about 1:30 every day, just says don't forget to get your guesses in. We're seeing a lot of people put it in there, forget about it, and not get the reminder in. So didn't want to nag people too much, but just one around lunchtime worked quite well. Unfortunately, my offset, it was meant to be at 12:30, but my offset with UTC is a little off, so that is on the backlog to fix. You can see then at 4 o'clock, it's time for the results, and it actually fires through. I have randomly picked that as with me as the winner. I'm not, as you'll see for some of the one, not always the winner with these, but you can see it picks up the actually winning guess. I guessed Adelaide, how far it was from the real answer. So it was a red Wattleborough Crescent in Langwarring, Victoria. So this, let me just pick it up here. You can see in brackets here, this is the text that came back from Bing. There is a web service for picking up these images. That's the text that's associated and you would see on the image. And then this is what it's picked up, what Bing has been able to interpret that as the actual address. So it uses the coordinates to get the distance from that and works out from all the guesses who came in closely. Now, what this obviously we could put in there, and we could put within something like a Power App. We could create a custom developed solution, a custom web page. What I really like about this being in Teams is that you've got this chat built into it, and it's built into where you're doing all your work, where you're doing your items already. Ooh, apologies. Bring it back to that. You can pick it up. You can have the chat that's going on. You can you can see that we get, I try not to say the word banter. It has so many negative connotations these days. but you can see the kind of open conversation that has about these. In some of the earlier ones, especially some of the pictures we've talked about, I think there was one in St Ives a few weeks ago. A few of the people in the channel have been St Ives, were raving about how good it was, and certainly made me want to go and visit there. We've talked about places people have been in Sweden, in Thailand, all sorts of different ones. And for our organisation, many of us are actually remotely based. We're not in the office, or we're either working from home, working with clients all over the UK. So we're often not there. And this has been a great way for me. I've only been in CPS a few months. It's been a great way to get to know people. And actually Neil, who was mentioned there, I'm now working with on a project, but I had a good feeling for what he was like from chatting to him here. So it's really helped the adoption of Teams. Probably a bad example, CPS was using Teams a lot already, but it certainly helped us engage with each other and see the benefit of Teams. Obviously, this is all very chat related. We've got within here also some of the other benefits you can get within Teams of a leaderboard. So all the results that get put in here go into an Azure table storage. And we can point Power BI at that, and you can see David is jumped in the lead. I'm actually in 4th place at the moment, which is particularly depressing. And especially as Gavin left several weeks ago, and I still haven't managed to catch up with him. This only keeps it, I think, for 30 days. So it is a rolling one. So it means that if someone becomes very dominant and then stop for a while, you keep people always wanting to be near the top. You can see I just plot some of the locations that the images have come through. You can even go through and look at the different places and different images that have come through. For example, that one was in Cleveland. Some of these are fascinating and never where we expect, and we come very, very wrong in terms of there. Also tracking how many entries we get per day, so it's been quite intriguing to see which days. I think Fridays generally we're seeing a lot more people doing it. Other days people are being busier, and we only get up to 4 or 5. So not a massive uptake. We have only put this a preview. We've got our corporate meeting tomorrow, so it's going to be published a bit more there and hopefully get a bit more engagement. Also within this, anyone can track a backlog item. So if they see a bug, they see something they'd like to add to it. For example, I noted on here, if that image will show nicely, there we go, that on the mobile client, it was actually truncating the edge there. So something I need to have a look at, the adaptive card that I'm using to make sure I've got the right settings for that to come through. And what that means is not only can people easily add their ideas on what's happening, they can see other ideas and boost those up, and other people can work on it. So Neil actually helped with reassessing the distance between 2 places. We found that if someone had guessed all the way around the world, the way I was doing GPS hadn't worked very well. The coordinates actually didn't cater for the fact. It kind of considered we were on a bit of a flat Earth, and didn't work. So redid those, and it's now working very nicely. So also contributing as a team to that. I'm just going to take a slight pause and see if there's any questions. I can see Luna said, would you get more points the more exact you are with details? We did consider that, and I think it may be something that we implement in the future to kind of see if people are more exact. I think the problem is we found that if people know, they tend to know straight away and get to the exact place. At this stage, it's worked very nicely with just having that one guess, but certainly something when it becomes to a larger group, getting that more accurate one can help in there. One thing we did add, we started to find people building the same location. It now, if someone has already guessed that place, or it's within, I think we said 5 or 10 kilometers, it will reject the next person that tries and said, sorry, someone has already got there. Can you try again with that? So I'm going to deviate a little bit here and just go into how you can set up your bots and think about creating your own bot. So moving away from the Bing bot specifically, talking about how you would design and think about a Teams bot there. The key point is you have your bot entry point. It's actually a REST interface effectively that gets called wherever it's hosted. A good way of doing that and a good way of designing it is to have these dialogues. So a dialogue is, you could think almost like a workflow for a particular conversation. If I go back to the Bing bots, let's just bring it back to conversation. If I think about that dialogue, the initial kickoff that's going on, let's go back to the start of one of these. That initial dialogue is, right, you want to pick an image. Here's an image. Do you like it? And the flow goes, do you want to choose the image, try another image, or switch to Google? I want to choose an image. And then it's come out of that dialogue, it's picked the image and moved on to something else. The next dialogue is, the image has been chosen, time to get your results. And then that will process each of the results. So if you imagine these bits of conversation as a dialogue, then you can start to build up the workflow of your application. Start to think how you enter that dialogue, in this case because the image has been chosen, how you exit that dialogue. Either everyone has provided come on brain, if everyone has provided an entry, or it's got to 4 o'clock, or we can actually manually trigger. And you can see here, if I put at, whoops, I must remember not to do this because we are actually there, but you can see at Bing bot, you can put some guidance within Teams of the kind of things that you can ask the bot. And one of those would be check results. So I could manually trigger the results if we wanted to do that before 4 o'clock and have it automatically. You can also do that as well. So that's your point of getting out of that dialogue and getting back to the main one. And once you finish that dialogue, where do you go from there? Are you going all the way back to the beginning? Are you triggering an activity? You start to think about that flow, and then you can fill in your code after that with a lot more structure. And I would say I started this in a lot more haphazard, almost treating it line by line, calling a set of functions, and I hit a lot of issues. Redesigning the bots, using these dialogues, using these groupings of conversation really helped me think through and think how it would work. And when I first started this bot, I have distressingly been working on it for about 2 years as other priorities came in and gone up and down. But when I first started, really it was scribbling bits of paper, using a bit of Visio to look at the workflow. One of the things that's changed now, I'm just going to bring up another window if I can find where it's gone to. Sorry, bear with me one sec. There we go. So as well as the bot framework, within Dynamics, there is actually a preview for a Dynamics agent, and you can create a demo agent box. If you go to va.ai.dynamics.com or search for Dynamics Dynamics Virtual Agent, you can sign up for a free preview. You can see, thankfully I managed to get this talk in within 14 days for this test one. And what's really nice with this is that you can create your bot using more of a GUI. Now, this may not be your final bot, but I found this a very nice way of visualizing what it would look like. You think about your greeting. So you can see here, you can customize your greeting. When someone connects to this, what are the initial messages you want to say to people? The greeting could be good afternoon, hello, hello. You can see in this case, it's a student services bot. It will say a message. If you'd like to speak to a human at any time, let me know. What can I help you with? And then it goes and waits for the response. And the response then becomes these set of topics. Now, these topics could be thought of as dialogues if you're talking the bot framework language. But you can see within here, for example, the hub hours. If this bot was to talk about student services, letting them know when the hub is available, when it's open, then the trigger phrase could be things like this. How do you get into that dialogue? Are you closed now? Are you open at noon, etc.? Are you open during Christmas? All these things around opening, closing times. You can start to think about those different phrases that get you into the right place. If we then go into the authoring canvas, you can start to then visualize that dialogue and how it goes through. So we've got those trigger phrases that start, and then the bot says, I'm happy to help. which location you're interested in. You look at this flow, you've then got a set of different responses here. So where we have here the 3 different hubs that could be available. In the BingBot example, that could be choose image, that could be switch to Google, that could be try another image. You can start to put options there. And then based on the option that the user replies, then you can reply and answer. So if it's hub 1, there's a set of opening times for that. If it's hub 2, there's a set of opening times. And because it's a bot, that will give buttons, but there's nothing to say that people can't reply with their own text as well. So it may be that you handle a different response to those 3, which could be, sorry, I didn't quite understand that, or it could be, no, we don't have a hub on the moon, sorry about that. You can start to put different responses in there, or in this case, just end the conversation. And this isn't say again that you use this. This is the saying this really helps you visualize how the bots can have that conversation, and you can even test it out with this. So this is a great way of prototyping your bot before you might either go for the simple one, and you could certainly, if you have a Dynamics license, you could start to use this, or you could start to look at how you then implement that within the bot framework. I'm very quickly going to show a little bit of code. I'm not going to dwell on this too much. It is all in GitHub, and I'll share the link to that at the end. But just to give you an indication, you can see here the folders. I hope that's not too small on the screen, but you can see the folders. You've got the dialogues. You've got that main dialogue. You've got the challenge guesser dialogue. And if I scroll to the top and zoom a little bit with that, hopefully it'll be a bit larger and easier to see, you can see we've got this challenge guesser dialogue, and it actually has a waterfall of steps. So if we think through that visualizing for the dynamics, you've got the introduction, you've got a set of actions or decisions to take place, you've got a final step in this case, and you can put the code within that in each of those steps. So where you've designed your bot using that Dynamics virtual agent, you can then apply that back within the code. Obviously, it's a little bit more technical, a little bit harder to read, but it's effectively the same set of logic that goes in there. For those that do like a bit of code and a bit of Azure, the code does include the Azure Resource Manager templates. So this can all be deployed very easily. I'm just writing up the final instructions to use that to make it a bit easier from the initial version that will allow you to go that and deploy it into your own environment and use it yourself. One thing I would say, you'll notice that within here, the bot that I've got on here is called the Where on Earth bot. I am, in fact, I'll come onto this on these slides. Let's flip back over to those. In terms of what next, as I say, going to improve the deployment instructions in GitHub. I'm also, I was contacted by Microsoft, and they're looking to use this as an app sample template. I'm being a little bit slow at having the time to be able to publish that, but it will be one of the samples similar to the Icebreaker bot that's been published by Microsoft on there. So looking to put this up there, make sure it's very easy to deploy into your own environment. At the moment, it is only there and available for each instance you put within your teams. There's just one bot, so there's not a bot per channel. It hasn't been designed to scale out, so you can have one per department, one per project team. It is just one per Teams instance at the moment. I would like to change that and tailor it a lot more within Teams, and so you can deploy it into multiple teams and have the replies on there. What else? If I jump to the backlog, here, there we go. If I jump to the backlog, there are a few different items I've been looking to pick up on there. I mentioned fixing the button layout. We do still have a few arguments. No one quite trusts Bing as to which is closest. So within that Power BI, because we've got all the different places and the GPS coordinates that people have captured, planning to also put that on there. And so you can look at any particular day, see where all the guesses were, and really make yourself feel more comfortable that it was the closest one. I mentioned multiple Bings. We've hit a couple of times that the Japanese and Chinese ones come in with Chinese characters, and then it almost seems to pick a very random place in the world that isn't related to it. So looking to do some translation with some of the Bing Translate to make sure we get the right thing from there. I've also got a bit of an issue with the auto trigger reminders. The auto triggers are triggered using Azure Logic apps. What I found is it doesn't enter that dialogue that I talked about there correctly. It only enters the dialogue when a person triggers it, when a person makes a reply. So I'm hoping there is a technical solution to that. I just haven't come across it. And as I mentioned, allowing the install across multiple teams as well. So still a bit more that can be done and extended with it. It is out on GitHub. If anyone would like to get involved and help contribute with it, I would be very happy to work together with you as well. Wrapping up a little bit early, but very much got some questions. If anyone has any questions, I've seen a couple of chats which I'll fling over to you in a sec. As I mentioned, github.com, Kevin McDonk, it's now Where on Earth bot rather than Daily Bing Challenge bot. Microsoft asked that we remove the Bing because we have Bing and Google in there, so it was a bit of a misleading name to it, so we're changing that. Would love to hear your feedback as to has this talk helped you? Has it helped you think about Teams adoption and different ways of rolling out to people? And also, do you think this will be a useful way of doing it? Would love to hear that, whether it's via the feedback link or via Twitter or contacting me on LinkedIn as well. I'm going to take a pause there and say any questions as I bring the chat window up. No questions from anyone. I'd love to hear. Do you think that would be something useful within your organisation that would help drive Teams adoption, or just help drive engagement between teams and getting to know people? Any thoughts would be much appreciated. Pausing there. This is the one downside of a virtual conference, is not being able to see people's reactions and faces on there. I will be around on the channel. I'll stick around until at least the next session. If you have any questions, jump them on there. At Kevin McDonk on Twitter. Let me know what you think, and I hope it helps some people thinking about Teams adoption. Otherwise, I will hand over to the next person in the session. I hope you have a fantastic day and enjoying all the sessions. I believe it will be recorded if you want to have a look at it later. Otherwise, thank you very much. And thank you to Chris and the team for hosting today. Bye-bye.